Let's get cracking. So, hi, I'm Luke. My pronouns are he, they. So, by day, I'm a design advocate at Zero Height, where I get to enthuse about the wonderful world of design systems and design ops as a job. But by night, I'm a beer podcaster, indie punk singer, musical theater wannabe, Etsy illustrator, and occasional parent. And if you didn't figure it out from that list of side projects, I wear a lot of different hats in both my professional and personal lives. I have a serious side project addiction and have ever since I was at uni. So, yeah, it's manifested in lots and lots of different ways as a musical theater director, actor, and lighting designer, a cabaret company, theater critic, indie club night, vinyl subscription company, amateur brewer, gig promoter, poster illustrator, ghost walker, and various other things that I've probably forgotten about by now. Some of these have lasted 6 months, some 6 years, some of them were mildly successful, some were really not successful at all. A similar thing has happened in my professional life. So, since I've been in full time employment post university, I've had roles in marketing, PR, social media, design, product management, front end engineering, and advocacy. So, this is not me standing here and asking you to acknowledge how great and varied my life has been. This is more so I can stand here in disbelief and wonder how it only took until 2020 before I realized I probably had ADHD. So, what is ADHD? So, you probably know this, but it stands for attention deficit slash hyperactivity disorder, and it's a neurodevelopmental disorder that is often marked by excessive amounts of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. In 1987, so people probably know about ADD and ADHD. I didn't actually realize, but it was in 1987 that they got bundled together into ADHD officially. And in 1994, they actually revised the categorization to include 3 different subtypes, which are attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, predominantly inattentive type. There's predominantly hyperactive impulsive type, and then there's the combined type. That's me. ADHD actually springs from executive dysfunction. Which basically means that there's a deficit in the cognitive processes that regulate, control, and manage other cognitive processes. And in adults, according to the NHS website, this results in things like these lovely things. So lots of things, from lack of attention to detail to poor organizational skills to forgetfulness to difficulty keeping quiet or constantly interrupting people and finishing their sentences to impulsive risk-taking behavior. I know that when I first saw this list, I just was like, oh wow, it's a laundry list for my personality. And if you think that you've been seeing ADHD a lot more recently, it's not surprising. So between 2007 and 2016, diagnosis of adult ADHD in the US shot up by 123%. We don't have more recent stats than that, but I'm sure it's actually gotten higher. And I'd say that a lot of this isn't because of people hearing about it and jumping on the bandwagon or a generation of like defective people. It's more because there's a lot more education around it, mostly informal education. Thank you to the internet, especially TikTok in the last few years. It's been great. And also the fact that we're slowly shedding a lot of the stigma that revolves around ADHD and neurodivergence in general, which is a very good. There's a whole bunch of interesting facts that I could go into about ADHD, like the fact that it's twice as likely to be diagnosed in men than women, mostly because women are very good at masking, how it's often misdiagnosed in adults as depression and anxiety, as they share a lot of the same markers. That happened to me, or how research suggests that, much like other neurodivergences, it exists on a spectrum. So it isn't clear cut you have ADHD or you don't have ADHD. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. Instead, I wanted to share with you some of the traits that I've identified as things that help or hinder my ability to not only do side projects, lots and lots of side projects, but to just live my life generally. And it's worth pointing out right now that this is my experience and it's not going to be a catch-all. This will work for you. There might be some things that work here for everyone, some that are specifically effective for me, but sharing is caring, right? So let's get into it. So first up, lack of organization and forgetting things. This one is a massive one for me, and one that I feel like I've only really started to nail in the last 3 years. So with so many projects, you'd hope that my brain is neatly organized lists of things to do. Tom Cruise in Minority Report throwing things around the screen like I'm a superstar. But in reality, it's more of a tornado of chaos with random things flying out at me at inopportune times vying for my attention. One of the ways that I've learned to manage this is via lists, or more specifically, my own version of bullet journaling. So I'm not going to go into in depth on bullet journaling, but I really highly recommend reading The Bullet Journal Method by Ryder Carroll. There's lots of great stuff in there. There's a little bit of crap too, but you can filter it out and see what works for you. I definitely wouldn't advise going down the rabbit hole of bullet journaling on YouTube, because you'll see some very beautiful looking bullet journals, but it may distract you from what you're actually trying to achieve. But for me, creating monthly, weekly, and daily to-do lists and notes allows me to pull the soup out of my head and get it onto paper, which then stops my brain from obsessing over it whilst I'm lying in bed at 3 a.m. Another one for me on this is low friction reminders. So if there's something that you need to do by a certain time, or there's something that you need to remember, I really love using Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa, whatever it is, to remind me. The fact that I have an Apple Watch that I can just quickly click a button and say, remind me to do this, is very handy. /remind is my favorite command in Slack as well. This allows me to do two things. It allows me to not drop everything to complete the task there and then, because that is a compulsion that happens when you have ADHD. But also, if I let it go for more than 5 minutes and decide I'm not going to complete it there and then, it also lets it not fall into that forgotten pit of forgotten tasks forever, so that I might actually get a chance of doing it at some point. Basically, if your phone alarms look like this, it is totally okay, and you should embrace it, because that's just what works for you. And finally, on a similar note for this, try and learn to embrace letting things go and forgetting them in the hopes that they'll come back later. It's a bit of a weird one. One of my favorite things to do when I worked in an agency was, when I got back from holiday, I'd delete all my emails with the knowledge that if somebody really needed to get in touch with me, they'll email me again. I didn't get fired, and generally it worked. Basically, FOMO doesn't exist, and we can all just banish it to the bin. Next up, hyperfocus and hyperfixation. So this is definitely one that I wasn't aware of until I started reading up on ADHD. So ADHD isn't just about an inability to focus. It's about having trouble regulating focus. So this means that there are times when I get into a blinkered hole of focus and nothing can distract me for hours on end. It's even led people close to me in my life insisting that I need to get my hearing checked because of my lack of ability to filter when somebody is talking to me when I'm in this state. It also shapes itself at a more macro level, with becoming fixated on an idea or topic for days or weeks. New hobbies, interests, and ideas can seem like they're core to my being for a short period of time and then be forgotten almost instantly. Side note, it's also why people with ADHD are more susceptible to addiction, but that's another talk. So this can obviously be handy, the focus and fixation bit, not the addiction bit, especially when you think about starting projects. That all-consuming focus can help you start things, get them off the ground, and put in the hours required to make it successful. On the flip side, it can also blind you to the downsides of whatever it is you're starting. So it can mean that when that fixation is over, you're left with a project that you don't particularly want to do anymore as well. So one of the ways that I've managed this particular problem is, to be honest, it's like self-awareness. It was something that I picked up in cognitive behavioral therapy, of labeling and analyzing thought patterns that have helped me realize when I'm hyperfixating. So when I realize that I'm really into something new, I stop and I write it down and I have a look at the traits of it and label it. And labeling it takes some of that power away. And then, even though it's hard and not always easy, I can choose whether I want to focus on it or not, and whether it's worth focusing on for a time. It doesn't always work, but it can help judge whether something is worth fixating on. So let's swing the other way to inattention and what this brings about. So one of the markers that has dominated my life is that I am top tier at not being able to multitask, or not being able to multitask, I should say, because more accurately, I will likely have 20 different tabs open, constantly switching between trying to write a talk, check Twitter, book a hotel, respond to an email, update a website, organize the time to chat with my mom at the weekend. And by 20 different tabs, 120 different tabs. The bullet journaling has helped quite a lot with this, as it helps bring some order to the tasks that need doing. Another thing that has helped is radical focus. When I really need to get something done, of just forcing myself to shut everything else down and do one task at a time. It's very uncomfortable, but it is sometimes needed. And you just set a timer for 25 minutes or however long of that radical focus time. The other side of hyperfixation is that things can sometimes feel a bit faddy if you look back at the interests that you've had. There's a good chance that the thing that you're investing loads of time into becomes uninteresting or a bit of a burden after a while. These are two things that I've tried to keep in mind with this, and two mottos with any of my side projects. One, everything is an MVP. And 2, quit when it feels like work or bad work. So, story time. Back in 2012, a friend and I birthed a club night called Early Doors Disco. So we started it in a rush of excitement with a real problem to solve, in that we wanted to dance to trashy indie music, and nowhere was open early enough for our old souls to do it before our last train home. So we had 2 major problems standing in the way of doing this. One, we had never DJed before, and 2, we'd never put on a club night, so we had no pedigree with venues at all. But we just took an MVP approach. We figured that all we needed was some gear that would allow us to do it. We needed to Google how to use the gear, and then we needed a venue to give us space. So we went the route of lowest friction. We chose a deliberately quiet night, a Wednesday. We chose a ridiculously early start time of 6 p.m., looked up how to do it, and gave it a go. Figured, what's the worst that could happen? And luckily for us anyway, by month 2, we had 150 people in a sweaty, tiny club in London on a Wednesday night dancing to Vampire Weekend at 8 p.m. We had 2 rules with this. We decided that if it took longer than a couple of days to plan, it probably wasn't worth it. And if it ever felt like work, we'd stop doing it. So it took us 5 years, a podcast, festival slots around the country and Europe, ill-advised gig promoting, which is a very bad idea, 4 different club themes for the interest to properly peter out and for us to call it a day. We now DJ a small indie pop festival in the fjords in Norway each year as part of this, but that's the only thing that's left. Knowing when to quit is really important. And I think the knowing when to quit has probably been one of the biggest challenges for me with side projects. When I have nothing on, I feel restless and bored, like I need to be creating or doing something. And when I have loads on, I feel really overwhelmed and find it hard to complete anything. It's a constant balance to keep this in check. And to be honest, part of this is I just keep an eye out for the signs of usually the latter, of being overwhelmed by too much. A big one for me with this is stimming. If people don't know what stimming is, it's like repetitive actions that self-soothing and comfort that are markers of neurodivergent behavior. So neurodivergence. So ADHD, it's very common in autism spectrum disorder as well. The repetitive behaviors start happening when I'm uncomfortable, stressed, or overwhelmed. So rubbing the ends of my fingers against each other, shaking my leg on the ball of my foot, scratching my head, which when I was backstage, I noticed I was doing quite a lot, which meant that I was a little bit nervous. Usually a sign that something is a bit off balance and it could be a sign that I'm heading to burnout or panic attacks. And recognizing these can help to head it off. Have I nailed it? No. Is it getting more and more manageable with time? Yes. And I hope that something in here is mildly interesting or provides some comfort or help if you recognize any of it, or at least provides awareness for some folks of how some other folks' minds work. I look forward to coming back and sharing some more techniques as I continue to learn about this. It's only been a few years now. First, I have to clear a couple of things off my to-do list, though. Thank you very much. I just wanted to give a shout out as well. So I've put that talk, which I will tweet, basically what I just said as a blog post, as a train of thought, and also a massive shout out to Nicole, who did all of the cute illustrations in there as well. Thank you.